Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for our third-party risk management best practices for 2024 webinar. My name is Jessie Redmond, and I will be your host. On your screen, you should see multiple widgets that you can use, including Ask Question, Media Player, Slides, Related Content, Speaker Bio, Request Demo, and Help. If you are unfamiliar with our webinars, all the widget boxes are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to maximize your screen space. At the bottom of your screen in the toolbar are icon buttons you can use to show and hide the widgets. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows in the top right corner of the widget. If you experience any issues or have technical questions, you can use the Help widget or submit them along with any other questions through the Ask Question widget. Don't worry, we do capture all questions throughout the session. We will be answering some during the webcast, but those that we do not have a chance to answer live, we will address with you via email. Today's live session is eligible for 1 CPE credit. If you wish to receive this credit, please remember to answer all of the polling questions that will appear on your screen during today's presentation. You will also be sent a follow-up survey link 24 hours after the live session that will need to be completed in order to receive the CPE credit. With us today, we have Greg Cameron, VinMinder's Head of Third-Party Risk Advisory. He will finish off the year with a review of the third-party risk management challenges and lessons learned in 2023. He'll also explore what might be on the third-party risk horizon for 2024 and beyond. You will see a link to a copy of today's slide deck, a link to our website, a link to our samples library, links to our What Vendor Documents Are Needed to Assess Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery infographic, our Consequences of a Vendor Breach and How to Prepare for One ebook, our Managing Issues in Your Third-Party Risk Management Program, the Complete Strategy ebook, as well as a link to our library of additional resources, all within the Related Content widget. With all that being said, I'd like to hand it over to Greg. Greg, the floor is yours.
Well, welcome everyone. Happy to be back as your presenter. Today's agenda really jam-packed full of information. We'll start off with challenges and lessons learned this year. We'll look forward. What's on the horizon? Key aspects of third-party risk management programs and best practices there. New organizations, more mature organizations can both take advantage of the information here. And we'll wrap it up with takeaways to move forward successfully. Well, when it comes to third-party risk management, every year is full of surprises and challenges. 2023 has been no exception. Cybercrime has exploded. Breaches, ransomware remain top threats. AI, artificial intelligence, is drawing a lot of attention with its multitude of cybersecurity, privacy, and copyright risks. Business continuity is always a concern. We'll talk more about that today, especially in the light of major events like MOVEit data breach and ransom demands. And though it may seem like 2023 was an easier year for natural disasters, there were actually still record-breaking $23 billion worth of events. There's geopolitical risks, of course. We're talking about Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, cyber threats from China. Vendor financial health, still a concern. There's high inflation, economic instability. We're talking about layoffs in the technology, healthcare, and retail sectors. Regulations are always changing. In 2023, we saw a very highly anticipated release. That's the interagency guidance. We'll talk more about that and some others that we'll highlight today. So let's take some time to examine more about these topics a little bit more closely. Third-party breaches continue to be the top cybersecurity threat faced by businesses. In fact, according to the annual Ponemon study, over half of the surveyed companies reporting experiencing a third-party data breach. These breaches are not only highly prevalent, but also increasingly expensive. The average cost of a breach is around $4.5 million, with healthcare data breaches costing an average of $11 million. Furthermore, cloud-stored data is particularly vulnerable. 82% of breaches affecting this type. The statistics are not great. Breaches are getting larger and more expensive, and unfortunately more common. You probably heard about one of the most impactful breaches this year, the MoveIt breach. This one was a doozy. So far, it affected 3,000 organizations across various industries. The data of over 67 million people was breached. There are no new lessons here, just too many reminders that we really have to strive for robust cybersecurity protections and validate the cybersecurity practices and controls of our vendors. Well, the rise of AI is exciting, but it's creating a whole new set of cybersecurity and privacy concerns. As the use of AI continues to grow, so too do concerns about cybersecurity and it's all of the risks that it poses. AI systems are vulnerable to hacking, with cyber criminals able to exploit weaknesses in the tech, gain access to sensitive data, or just simply cause disruption. In addition, the use of AI in cybersecurity itself is not immune to threats, with attackers potentially able to manipulate or deceive the AI systems using sophisticated techniques. So as AI becomes more sophisticated, it's important that cybersecurity measures keep pace to ensure that the technology remains safe and secure. Well, business continuity is another top concern. It's actually second behind cyber. Of course, we're always going to have natural disasters, weather, right? Scientists have actually indicated to kind of brace for more of this severe weather in the future. And economists, of course, have been telling us about the sustained economic instability that we're experiencing. As we look past, the last year, cyber criminals did a great job in figuring out ways to interrupt business. There's labor shortages in some industries, and of course, there's layoffs that across your vendors, and that might actually impact your own operations. So without proper continuity and resiliency in place, your vendor may experience outages from these scenarios. You want to endeavor to know how they plan to keep the lights on. How do they keep operating if those business interrupting events happen? You also want to plan yourself as an internal control. Look at disruption and what you can do internally. So regardless of the vendor, you're looking at your own continuity as a control. And beyond this, it's not just your direct vendors that you need to be concerned about. There's interruptions to service and supply chain due to fourth parties, your vendors' vendors. This is why you need to make sure your vendors not just have continuity, but also third-party risk management programs in place to monitor and manage their own vendors like you're doing yourself. In today's globalized economy, many businesses rely on vendors and suppliers from all over the world. However, geopolitical tensions and conflicts can disrupt supply chains, leading to delays, shortages, and even data breaches. For example, if a vendor's servers are located in a country that's experiencing political instability or a cyber attack, the business that relies on that vendor's services could be at risk. Throughout this year, we've observed a continuous imposition of sanctions on Russia and the overall region of Ukraine. Additionally, there's been fluctuating energy prices and shortages leading to increased costs for businesses. This has been caused by a variety of factors, including geopolitical tensions, supply chain disruptions, and unexpected weather events. More recently, the events in Israel and Palestine have captured the world's attention, with both sides engaging in violent conflict, resulting in significant economic and political impacts, not only in the region, but also on the global stage. So let's talk about third-party financial health for a moment. A lot of us had an unfortunate wake-up call when 3 regional banks went under this year. Very surprised with that. And while there's a lot of details we could discuss, the bottom line is that your financial partners should be subject to due diligence, especially regarding their financial health and their books. Now, we did a whole webinar on this topic earlier in the year that covers the ins and outs of that particular situation. But the takeaway here is that any significant business relationship warrants due diligence and monitoring. When it comes to those more traditional vendors, small businesses make up 99% of the businesses in the U.S. domestically. Therefore, it's highly likely that you have multiple vendors who fall into this category. It's good to know that in the past couple of years, fewer businesses have been closing down than before. However, the closure rate is still about 1 in 5, so it's important to keep this in mind when you're considering your own vendor list and your future relationships. With all the news about inflation, it's evident that the situation is not good. You don't need to be an economist, really, or read a study to understand this. Despite the significant recovery, there still comes a point where vendors cannot raise their prices any further without losing customers. When businesses lose income, it affects their ability to service your organization. Additionally, labor shortages in some industries can have a significant impact on the level of service that your organization receives. This can lead to vendors losing customers, which ultimately affects their financial health. So it's crucial to monitor your vendor's financial health and regularly check in with them to see how they're doing. Even if you're dealing with non-public companies that don't have to report publicly, you should work with your finance experts to explore other alternatives for reviewing their financials and books. One example there would be Dun & Bradstreet reports. For the next few slides, we want to highlight some regulatory changes and updates. A lot of information here, so I just want to highlight on the first page here from the financial services sector, very long-awaited interagency guidance. Effective in July 2023, replaces all previous guidance by OCC, FDIC, and the Fed, applies to all banks regardless of size. Some interesting nuances talk about business relationships. So, the scoping of third-party risk management and who's in the inventory for your life cycle. Clarify some roles from a board perspective. Additional details about recommendations for due diligence. So be mindful of this one. Wanted to start with that. Next up, we have the FTC Safeguards Rule, effective June 2023. This is aimed at ensuring security of customer information. In terms of scope or those impacted, financial institutions are non-bank lenders, mortgage brokers, consumer reporting agencies, and auto dealers. So some of the highlights of the FTC Safeguards Rule are where financial institutions are required to develop, implement, and maintain information security program with technical and physical safeguards. So a lot of nuance, a lot of detail there in the structure and the implementation. It also goes into further amendments and clarifications on reporting data breaches and other security events back to the Federal Trade Commission. Next up, the Securities Exchange Commission. There's a breach notification rule here, just recently effective September 23. Some details here are about the requirement of including a detailed description of your cyber program in annual 10-K filings. Also, in the case of any material cybersecurity incidents, a Form 8-K must be filed and speedily reported to the SEC. Next up is from the NCUA for our Federal Credit Union friends. This is similar from the SEC in terms of incident notification. So there's details around the reporting. Incidents have to be reported as soon as possible if there is a cyber incident. And the following slide has some details here about what constitutes a incident. So now this new rule defines a reportable cyber incident if one or more of the following outcomes is true. And first one's the most substantial. It's that it's a loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability of a network or member information system that results from unauthorized access to or exposure of sensitive data, disrupts vital member services, or has a serious impact on the safety and resiliency of operational systems and processes. So lots of detail in terms of the methodology, the timing, and what actually constitutes a cyber incident from the NCUA. Well, here we wanted to compile state-level privacy laws. You can see there's several that were enacted in the past year. I'm not going to read every single one, but I think what the message here is that this continues to be a changing landscape, and so your compliance team and your third-party risk management team really have to stay on top of monitoring changes in this space. It's not going to settle down anytime. If anything, more regulation requirements and supervision will be produced and disclosed in years to come.
And this brings us to the first poll question of the day. You should see the poll question now in the slides area. If you have any issues, please feel free to send us a message using the Ask Question widget, and we will be happy to assist. As a reminder, if you wish to receive the CPE credit for today's session, you must answer all poll questions and be in attendance for the entire live session. This poll question is, was your organization affected by regulatory changes in 2023? Yes, no, somewhat, or unsure? Greg, we have a question here from the audience that we could go ahead and answer. And this question is, who in the organization should be responsible for identifying all the laws and regulations that we need to follow?
Okay, well, most often this is going to be a compliance team. Sometimes this is actually a combination of legal compliance, legal risk and compliance. That's the primary. Beyond this group, because third-party risk is really an extension of internal operations and traditional internal risk, we also recommend third-party risk management team take co-ownership of this, also monitor the regulatory landscape and peer benchmark with similar organizations and really be involved with that. Now, we often see risk or steering committees assembled to also, just ensure groups like cyber and legal and business continuity, and of course us in third-party risk management, are all talking across the aisles, have visibility into these overlapping risks and regulations and the approach to their own disciplines. So hopefully that's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for answering that poll question. Here are those results. By the way, you may have noticed reactions such as a thumbs up or heart coming across the screen. If you find this feature distracting, you can turn it off by clicking the 4 arrows in the top right-hand corner of the Slides widget, which will expand the slides to full screen and no longer show the reactions. Also, before we move on, in the Related Content widget, you will find our Consequences of a Vendor Breach and How to Prepare for One ebook. As we've discussed, cybersecurity risk is more prevalent than ever, and this resource will help you be prepared. With that, Greg, back to you.
So by now, you're probably aware of various ESG or environmental, social, and governance disclosure and transparency laws that have been evolving for some time. I'm going to talk about this over the next few slides, but I want to highlight that in the U.S., it's really market-driven at this point and not necessarily federally regulated. It is very much a political issue globally, and I think that will remain to be seen, especially with this year domestically being 24 being an election year. And then interestingly, there's 20 countries that have made it a mandate to disclose ESG information. Some of those include the UK, Hong Kong, Australia, Canada, Chile, and beyond. So part of ESG domain is the social issues. For example, forced labor, or also known as modern slavery or human trafficking. And this has garnered international attention, and rightfully so. So in the U.S., we see a tariff act that was amended to prohibit import of goods produced by forced labor. Internationally, there's many countries with existing regulations around supply chain and auditing and ensuring there's more due diligence and transparency about who's working and who's involved across the entire labor force. Now, the last piece about ESG is there is a focus for larger banks for effective management and supervision of climate-related financial risks. So these are climate principles, again, aimed at larger banking organizations and making sure that they supervise and they're managing both themselves, their business lines and operations, but also how third parties are potentially impacting climate and implementing, mitigations for that particular area and concern. So now, what do we think is going to happen in 24? Well, we don't have a crystal ball, but from the experience of the past year, from a third-party risk management perspective, we know that cybersecurity issues are here to stay. There will be more and bigger breaches and ransomware scenarios to watch out for. With those breaches and other business interrupting events, business continuity planning and testing on your side and on the vendor side are essential. As mentioned, that won't change. I think we can also reasonably expect robust regulatory supervision and enforcement actions in 24. We already mentioned the interagency guidance. So all signs are there for this. Financial institutions that include both banks and non-banking institutions can prepare to be at the forefront of the supervision and examinations. The regulators were fairly quiet after the pandemic, but this year they've been ramping up and they've levied some pretty hefty fines, and we feel like this is going to continue. Now, for another topic that's pretty big is ESG. It's an election year, and ESG is going to be in the mix. It's going to be a hot topic. So expect a lot of pushback from all sides and a lot of litigation. In the meantime, just make sure you're up to date on where your organization is with ESG today. Make sure you understand their objectives and the actions that they're taking moving forward. Since third parties are going to be in those scoped for 3 carbon emissions reporting and the pressure for visibility in supply chains, you can reasonably predict that your third-party risk management team will also be engaged, whether that's for reporting purposes or for direct enhanced due diligence on that particular area of your vendor. So now that we've had our year in review and thinking about what might come up, let's just talk about what every organization can do to make sure that you're setting yourselves up for success as best as possible. Whenever I think about things that are pretty chaotic, I take things back to the basics. the fundamentals. Make sure our foundation is strong. This approach really works well, especially across the third-party risk management lifecycle. So think first and foremost about documentation from a governance perspective. Is your policy up to date? Do people have visibility to it? Has it been approved? Are you following it? Can you actually evidence what's been documented there? If someone from the outside comes in, you're able to actually prove that you've put it into practice and you're following it. Make sure you have an issues management process where you can identify and manage those issues effectively. Make sure you're on schedule. Look at your schedule. Who's due for the year? Who's behind? What caused those delays? So in terms of risk assessments, in terms of due diligence, recurring assessments and due diligence, look at that schedule and again, scrutinize why there might have been any delays historically and look for improvement opportunities on how you can make things go more smoothly in the future. Continue to look at your reporting and your metrics and your communication efforts and make sure that everyone understands what you're trying to accomplish and your internal stakeholders understand where you are in that effort in terms of progress and in terms of overall risks that you're experiencing. Well, here's Ben Miner's visual of the third-party risk management lifecycle. So let's take a moment to brush up on this. We need to check to make sure that we're following the right path, that it's sequential, and that we're not missing any of these steps. Really, no matter how experienced you are, how mature your program is, you can really benefit from taking a look at this and comparing your own approach and having that periodic review of the life cycle. So I want to start at the bottom this time, point out the foundation of the life cycle is built from the oversight, the accountability, the governance, if you will. So documentation and reporting, independent reviews, these are foundational elements, so important. I want to be sure that you're thinking about all of this as the foundation that sets you up for success. It's support from the top and structure so that you can actually implement the onboarding, ongoing, and offboarding elements. So think about that. Do you have the right tone from the top? Do you have the support you need? Are roles and responsibilities clear? And are people accountable for fulfilling them? How is your training effort? Are you missing any roles? Are there any gaps to fill? We talked about your policy. It's a great time to look at that. When's the last time it's been reviewed? Are there changes that need to be required? Now, if you're subject to those new financial service regulations, then for sure you need to update policy to reflect newly expanded scope for third-party risk management to include all business relationships. You should look out for legal risk as an inherent risk category and indicator. So look for that particular nuance. So looking at the first leg of our life cycle, the onboarding leg, this first and foremost includes planning and risk assessment. You haven't made a decision yet on who you're going to move forward with. You might actually be comparing multiple vendors with similar products and services. So first and foremost, are these products and services in scope of your program? Do they warrant the effort that you're about to move forward with? And if yes, that's when you need to perform risk assessment, get a sense of what's triggered so that you can be informed and move into due diligence, risk-based due diligence. It's informed on which categories and to what extent those categories have been triggered within risk assessment. They're asking the right questions and looking for the right evidence and being very targeted in your due diligence effort. And then you conclude onboarding with contracting. You're negotiating, you're adding service level agreements and other service delivery specifics. You're allowing yourself to evaluate their performance moving forward by the clauses that you're inserting here. You're confirming legal terms and conditions such as the right to audit, so that a year or 2 years down the line, you can revisit this effort. You can perform due diligence, at will, whether that's proactively because something happened, or if it's just scheduled and it's the right thing to do. Next up, we have our ongoing stage. This is the period you're in the longest. You're actually using the product or service. So this includes reassessing. Risks change over time. Just because they were low risk a couple of years ago doesn't necessarily mean they're still low. So look for reassessing. Look for monitoring for performance and for other risk indicators. Maybe they're in the news. Maybe they recently merged with another company. Reassessments don't necessarily always have to be scheduled. They can be ad hoc and be proactive based on how your monitoring is going. Of course, there's contractual renewals that are in this phase. If things are moving forward, going well, you want to continue the relationship. And then, of course, revisiting due diligence, especially for those relationships where you've assessed and maybe there's increased risk. We want to perform due diligence and revisit those controls and ask the targeted questions to make sure your vendors are doing the right things. Now, the last segment of our life cycle is offboarding. This is concluding the relationship. It might be proactive because they're not performing and you want to move away from the vendor. It might be reactive. They're ending the relationship with you. Maybe they're going out of business. Whatever the case, we want to perform this phase consistently and make sure we have the right processes in place. We can think about it in 3 different areas here. There's termination. That's more of the legal aspect. That's the concluding the contract, making sure that the final payments have been taken care of. That's making sure that equipment's being returned, that contract clauses are completed, things like destruction of data, for example. From a business perspective, that's where we can think about exit plan. How have those internal customers preparing themselves for the end of this relationship? Do they have an alternate vendor ready to go? Are they no longer reliant on this product and service? What's happening there? Both termination and exit plan include both your own business as well as the vendor, so be mindful of that. And then from a third-party risk management perspective, there's closure, of course. That's updating reports and your inventory, letting your customers know, for example, if it's a critical vendor that you're no longer utilizing, that they're off the critical list, things of that nature. So there's the administrative perspective to conclude this particular relationship. Well, the next fundamental in our list is documentation. Your documentation really should be providing the rules and the overall roadmap of your program and allow transparency to it so your entire organization understands your goals and how you're executing it. You really should be thinking about top-down. Start with your policy, confirm that it's been reviewed. We always recommend on an annual basis to go through and really scrutinize it, have as many eyes on it as possible. That might be your compliance team or compliance, legal, regulatory, if it's a kind of a combination effort. Certainly your third-party risk management stakeholders that have input into how things are operating. You could bring in lessons learned. How are things done? What needs to be, changed? All of that input might drive changes to your policy. You also want to make sure it's reflective of your actual current practices. You don't want to put yourself out of compliance because you're doing it one way, but you've documented another, right? So think about the accuracy and being able to evidence whatever is in your policy. Procedures are also incredibly important. You want to make sure that there's manuals for, the softwares that you're using or issues management process that you're performing, that your staff are sufficient and qualified, which would be the regulatory language that you'll see. So make sure that they're supported by those procedures. And we could also think about reporting here as well. All right, so the next key aspect is going to be issues management. From a third-party risk management perspective, an issue is any unexpected result or scenario requiring further evaluation or actions to mitigate risk. We recommend all programs, regardless of size and maturity, to have this in place so that when an issue does pop up, and they always do, you can be sure that you're taking it seriously and you have the right process in place to manage it. So what that involves is a log, right? A formal way to document and capture the issue. It's the description of the issue. What was the initial cause? What is the severity of it? Who is it impacted? Who's now accountable for it and involved in the recovery or the fix, if you will? How is it intended to be fixed? What's the remediation date? So once you have all that you need, you want to hold people accountable through this effort, through reporting, through escalation, through timely updates, and monitoring of the issue. Speaking of escalation, really here, you want to use issues management consistently. Don't play favorites. The rules should really apply to everyone in the process. Otherwise, really, this becomes a lot less effective. So consistency is king. It's not just critical vendors. It is non-criticals, regardless of risk. And in that way, all of your vendor owners are involved, and you're able to capture issues and have more lessons learned to look back upon.
Our second poll question of the day is, when it comes to our current third-party risk management program, our organization is fully prepared to efficiently handle identified risk and tackle potential risk that may arise in the future. We have a program that is mostly good, but it requires a review and update to ensure that it remains effective. We have a program that is less than ideal and requires significant improvement. We're on the right track, but we just got started, or you're not sure. Greg, here's another question from the audience that we can answer.
Okay,
Do we need to include issue management in our third-party risk management policy?
I would, yes. Now, it doesn't have to be labeled issue management, but it is this formal process of capturing and officially logging these unexpected, non-desirable events, responding to them, escalating, working to close them out. We know we're going to face these challenges along the way with any vendor. So, yes, the policy should have this process included. And then, of course, the follow-up is to make sure staff involved are trained and able to execute and use that process. Thanks.
Thank you, Greg. We have just over 30 seconds left on our open poll question, so please submit those responses quickly. If you have any issues submitting the poll, or if you have questions in general, please submit them using the Ask Question widget, and we will be happy to assist. And we are down to about 15 seconds on our open poll question, so please get those responses in momentarily. Thank you. Okay, here are the results. Thanks again, everyone, for taking the time to answer the poll. I'd like to quickly direct your attention back to the related content widget, where you will find our What Vendor Documents Are Needed to Assess Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery infographic. As Greg mentioned, it's likely business continuity and disaster recovery will remain a top issue for 2024, and this is a helpful resource to ensure your organization is collecting the correct documents from your vendor. Okay, Greg, let's continue with the presentation.
All right. Well, one of the most important things you can do this year, and every year really, is to make sure your tools for identifying risk are as effective as they can be. you wouldn't want a surgeon use a dull scalpel, right? So you need to use the same mindset when it comes to your risk assessments and due diligence document requests, that they're updated and they're sharp and ready to go. So get together with your subject matter experts. Have them take a deep dive into their area, their domain or category in question. Ask them if you're asking the right questions. Are you requesting the right documents for the particular control that's being scrutinized? Make sure that these assessments are as up-to-date as possible with new and emerging risks. Think about it. 5 years ago, most of us didn't really have any questions related to ransomware, as an example. So as the industry changes, as regulation changes, as global threats and risks change, so too should your methodology of inherent risk as well as due diligence questions. A good example is updating your risk questionnaire to understand when there's a fourth party and to ask your vendor for their third-party risk management practices, whether that's a policy or otherwise, to make sure that you get the evidence that they're doing risk assessments and monitoring on your fourth party. Another key aspect, of course, is program metrics and reporting. So important because it can help you as a practitioner elevate the visibility of your program and its credibility and ensure that everyone understands your mission and objective. It can also help you objectively measure effectiveness and kind of self-evaluate. So if we don't measure our program, how do we know it's working as intended, right? First, remember your program metrics should demonstrate how it supports organizational objectives. So if a larger goal is to achieve regulatory compliance, then your third-party risk management metrics should feed into that larger, maybe GRC register, for example. Your metrics should identify program risks at the macro level, right? We want to know about individual vendors and challenges, especially within the subset of critical vendors. Who's not performing? Where there are heightened risks or indicators that we care about? And how about overall internal compliance? How are we doing against our policy? Are we behind schedule for risk assessments or due diligence? How long is it taking to complete contracts? And this is a great way to kind of evaluate success. Of course, your data and your metrics can help you prioritize and drive action. So whether this is leaning on a non-compliant business unit or helping you get additional resources and attention applied where needed. So there are two other important factors that come to mind here when we think about success and failure of your program. So here we're talking about communication and collaboration, your subject matter experts, your vendor owners, your support from the top. Does your board and your executives understand your mission statement and what you're trying to achieve? Effective third-party risk management requires clear communication and engagement with all stakeholders. They have to understand why this is important, what part they play in the successful execution, what's at stake, what's at risk if it's not successful. So regular interactions, feedback mechanisms, how are they doing? What can be improved? Collaboration with subject matter experts. We talked about bringing them in for review of risk assessment and due diligence question sets. Really critical to achieving all of your goals. Vendor owners can provide valuable insights into products and services that they're using. Obviously, the performance of those particular vendors and products and services, and help to identify and assess risks. This is a team sport, right? So stakeholders need to share responsibility, and this is a cultural aspect in order to communicate and collaborate with all of your stakeholders. Well, it's really important to think about our resources and looking at them strategically, tactically. We talked about economic instability, and some of our programs are challenged, and there's limit to budget, to headcount, to expertise across that. So it's time to scrutinize where we can improve and streamline different things. So, reduce or eliminate manual processes whenever possible. Leverage technology resources. You might have tools in your organization already that you might not realize that you could take advantage of. Issues management, risk repositories, communication aspects. There's plenty to take a look at there. Vendor risk monitoring and alert services can be helpful. It's key to reserve your biggest efforts for vendor engagements with the biggest risks or the largest impacts, so i.e. your critical vendors. But, it's time to think at the end of the year strategically, where can we make changes? Where can we allocate funds, headcount, and other resources appropriately to continue to mature and meet our goals? Really important to consider the value of outsourcing third-party risk management, not necessarily as an entirety, but often segments, like outsourced due diligence is a great example. There's an important lesson to learn here. It can be beneficial to outsource certain areas if you don't have the subject matter experts in-house, if there's too much volume for you to take on and you're falling behind. There are various qualified third-party risk service providers that can offer assistance in managing workloads, especially for organizations that are understaffed. Also keep in mind financial regulators have recognized that outsourcing due diligence is an acceptable way to access expertise and have subject matter experts scrutinize vendor control areas on your behalf, or to keep up with risk monitoring. We talked about artificial intelligence in this space. That's essentially a great way to outsource risk monitoring. It is crucial to remember that anything you're outsourcing, you're still responsible for the risks. Understand what's being provided to you. So it's important to choose your external resources very prudently and those relationships that you might be outsourcing segments of your overall program.
Our third poll question of the day is, in 2023, the biggest challenge for our third-party risk management program was a data breach or other cyber event, lack of resources or too much work, weak tone from the top, from the board and management, changing regulatory requirements, other, or you're not sure. Greg, let's go ahead and answer one more question from the audience. If my organization was impacted by a data breach, what should our first step be?
First steps, well, in any event, we're always assembling our team, right? This might be the incident management or crisis management team. In terms of your stakeholders there, you're thinking about cyber and information security, in addition to third-party risk management and legal. Others like business continuity might be involved. Now, beyond this initial assembling, you want to think about scoping, identifying the data that's impacted. You're thinking about notifying customers, offering support there. Your communications team might be drafting something that might be public or customer facing. So overall, those are some initial considerations. This team is going to continue to identify the root cause and work towards what the overall resolution should be. Jesse, thanks.
Here are those results. Thank you to everyone for answering this question. Within the related content widget, you will find our Managing Issues in Your Third-Party Risk Management Program, the Complete Strategy ebook, available for download. This is a helpful ebook to reference. Greg, I'll pass it back to you.
Well, with 2024 right around the corner, just weeks away, here are 8 best practices for this year. We talked about following the life cycle. Look at the roadmap. Look at gap assessment. Compare it to what you're doing, and insert the best practices that will help you improve. Update your questionnaires. Partner with your subject matter experts. Don't assume what you're currently using is adequate. Take the time to, on an annual basis, to re-review that. Keep cybersecurity a priority. That's not going away. It's the top risk. Globally, it's a challenge. Collaborate internally. Make sure there's communications across the aisle and you understand each other's goals and how you can work with each other. Similarly, business continuity. Both your vendors' continuity is important, as well as your own internally. So regardless of who's impacted and what the driver was for the scenario, you are prepared and you know how you're going to continue to move forward. Next up, we have metrics, and we talked about reporting and being able to establish regular reporting to show your successes, but also to show your failures and to scrutinize where there's opportunities to improve your particular program. Look at your resources. Maybe there's opportunities to change how you're allocating staff and headcount and technologies across your third-party risk management program. Understand regulations. Make sure that there's one or more people monitoring this landscape, whether it's a legal compliance, risk group, whether it's your third-party risk management team themselves. This is a changing landscape that's going to continue to grow and be more demanding over time, so continue to understand that. And lastly, communicate and collaborate effectively. It cannot be done in a silo. Open up, create bridges, and open up those lines of communication to other teams for opportunities to collaborate. And I'm sure there's plenty of synergies and maybe even more in place than you realize to take advantage of.
Great. Thanks so much, Greg. Before we dive into more questions and answers, I would like to thank everyone for attending. I would also like to thank Greg for his time in sharing some important information. On your screen now, you will see our upcoming webinars, our Vendor Risk Management 101 webinar on January 9th, and our Third-Party Risk Management Governance Documents, What You Need to Know webinar on January 23rd. We hope you'll be able to join us for those sessions. A link to register for those is in your copy of today's presentation slides. Let's now go ahead and answer some more questions that have come in during this session. Okay, Greg, our next question is, how long should our third-party risk management policy be?
Sure, common question. I don't think there is a perfect answer for number. I think it's all about substance and content. We have to remember that it should be long enough to outline purpose, scope of vendors, scope of the business that this applies to, things like roles and responsibilities, terms and definitions, and ideally think about the entire third-party risk management lifecycle, the who, what, when, and even where across that lifecycle. We can reserve the how for procedures and other documentation. So, based on experience and peer benchmarking, I would say, across that's probably going to be 10 to 20 pages. Again, it's not about length as much as it is about substance and ensuring that's, a complete thought there. Thanks.
Great. Next question. What is a good way to prepare ourselves in advance of an examination?
Yeah, absolutely. I think preparation can be as simple as starting with a checklist. to gather what you might need. We'll call it evidence. Here, it's better to have more than you actually need or actually plan to offer, making sure that's at the ready rather than go chase it down when asked for it. You could also consider practicing who will answer questions and present directly. They should be familiar with the evidence that you've prepared. You could also look up recent changes to regulation, or think about the previous examination, any follow-ups that are for sure going to be coming up in the conversation, right? So beyond that, I think starters in terms of compiling evidence, think about your policy, think about reports and metrics. Even meeting minutes could work there as evidence of assembling and even training. A vendor list, so your inventory of critical vendors, evidence that the vendor's product services have gone through risk assessment and you have risk levels identified. There might be other samples of work products like due diligence, proof of monitoring and performance, and I would even go to issues log, especially if there was something, recent high-profile event that's, very publicly known, that, it's good to have evidence that you've responded or have remediated that. Hopefully that's helpful. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg. Our next question here. Can we use an enterprise tool for issues management?
Absolutely. We've seen this commonly done in larger organizations with, so-called incident or crisis management systems. It's also not uncommon to use IT-type ticket systems as well. But I think what's really imperative is that you're thinking about user access, all of your vendor owners, all of your subject matter experts involved in due diligence, right? You have to make sure that it's accessible and that they're trained on this. On the input side, you want to make sure that there's an ability to capture all of the data you want, and that might be different than those enterprise level tools, or you might not have the ability to drive changes there. And then, of course, think about output, right? The ability to report against the entire inventory and produce, a metric or an understanding of what issues have been there historically. And that also is important for examinations. So, there's a lot to keep in mind there. I think it's a possibility, but you have to go through that kind of decision-making process before you go with enterprise versus dedicated third-party risk management system and tooling.
Great. I think we have time for one quick question. How is vendor performance monitoring done?
Okay. Well, I will go as quick as I can. So performance monitoring, the confirmation that expected value from a vendor relationship is being realized. The question is mainly, are contractual obligations being met? We know the cost, so this is now that process that validates the benefit in the cost-benefit ratio. So immediately a couple things come to mind in terms of the how. You're thinking about vendor owners. They have the best visibility to this, so they need to be trained and aware that they're going to be responsible for this. That means that there's a human element here. You can't really automate this. You can't really outsource it either. You have to have the folks really, in the position to answer these questions. In terms of methodology, we always see scorecards and or questionnaires as a way to capture the input, but more importantly, flag it for concerns or trends. Decreasing performance trends are really important. It's not always black and white. Sometimes it's a trend, right? It's going the wrong way. And just, be mindful. It should be objective and subjective, or quantitative and qualitative in nature. So you're thinking the quality of the products and services, the frequency of them being delivered, timeliness, is it on time? Has there been delays? things like uptime in systems, background support, communications around the product and service, even right down to formal service level agreements that are documented in your contract. All of that are good inputs to validate and get a sense of exactly, how things are performing. So hopefully that's helpful too. Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks, Greg. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have left today for questions. Thank you, Greg, for taking the time to address some of those that came in. Any questions we did not have time to answer today, we will address offline. We would like to thank you all for attending and hope you found today's session valuable. You can ask even more questions inside of our third-party think tank, an online community that is dedicated to third-party risk professionals and free to join. Just because today's session has ended doesn't mean the conversations and questions must. Post your questions at thirdpartythinktank.com and see what your peers have to say. In the community, you'll find thousands of free educational resources, including resources related to third-party risk management. If you'd like to become a member of Third Party Think Tank, you can register on the site or shoot us an email and we'll get you registered and send you a link to set your password. We did record today's session and that recording link will be provided to you in a follow-up email that you will receive tomorrow afternoon. Also in that follow-up email will be the survey link for you to request the CPE credit. On behalf of VinMinder, it has been a pleasure. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.